I want to start by asking Kamal Sibbal about the moment of this announcement on the sidelines of the G20. The details not fully out in terms of the exact route, but the idea is to revive the old spice route, India, the Arab world and Europe. Do you think that this has the capacity and the potency to be a strong counter to China's Belt and Road?
I think this initiative of India, Middle East, Europe corridor has a logic of its own, and we should not diminish its importance by talking about it as a competitor or a rival to the BRI. The BRI had a logic of its own, given China's huge financial resources, its huge overcapacities in many areas, its ambitions to be a global power. After all, if it has become the largest exporting country in the world, it means it has to export, it has to find markets, and it is combining both its manufacturing capacities and its financial capacities to develop these linkages through the BRI. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that countries like India or others have to think of rivaling them, because there is a logic of its own in terms of our connections to the Gulf countries, especially. If you've seen the transformation that has taken place in our relations with the Gulf country, it makes eminent sense. We signed an FTA with the UAE. We are thinking or hoping to sign with the GCC. Our relations with Saudi Arabia have been totally transformed. These two countries have huge and ambitious plans to transform and modernize their economies. You look at their 2030 vision documents and you can see what they are planning. India has a huge presence in this region in terms of manpower, including people who are technically qualified, as well as our energy resources come from this area. We have a lot of remittances coming from this area. Defense cooperation is on the anvil. There is the whole issue of food security, because these countries don't grow their own food. And India can actually give them assured food supplies by developing our agriculture in order to subserve their needs.
But Navdeep, what concerns me is the fact that some of these countries in the Arab world have fraught relations. You've served as an ambassador in different parts of the Arab world. At this moment, it seems that there is proximity, but there's, at least the differences are being kept on the side. I'll know that that could change at any time. So you've made all this effort, turn, and we've seen this happen. There have been times when we've spoken about letting something pass through or near Pakistan. That concern going to stay, that at this moment relations could change?
What the financial experts would call political risk, right? It's in many different dimensions. But I think, really, apart from Europe, France, and I don't think much political risk. The House of Saud has been around in Saudi Arabia. The Nahyan family in UAE for about 150 would be able to call them reasonably stable monarchies in the context of monarchies. So I think the fact that the presidents of both UAE and Saudi Arabia were present around the table when this announcement was made, and previously in May, the national security advisors of the four countries had also met in Riyadh.
But there's talk about Israel using the Haifa port as well as part of the same corridor.
Well, the relationship between Israel and UAE has transformed in the last 2 years post the Abraham Accords. There's a lot going on beneath the surface between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and we keep seeing reports about the Biden administration trying to stitch together a grand bargain where relations would also be established between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And by all accounts, the Saudis are not averse to the relationship in principle. It's just what can they get in return in terms of security guarantees from the Biden administration and some sort of a deal for the Palestinians. So there's a lot going on that. I think the relationship today, post the Abraham Accords, is far more positive and conducive to this kind of a corridor than it was even 3 years back.
Why is America pushing this so hard? Ultimately, if this is happening on the sidelines of the G20 in India, the role of President Biden and the American administration is crucial. That this improves trade between India, the Arab world, and Europe seems quite possible. What's in it for America?
I think,
Michael
from the
Kubel.
American... Okay.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think first, just a brief caveat. I think it's important. We don't want to jump the gun with this new project. Many of these grand connectivity corridors that have emerged in recent years haven't really panned out, and that includes the G7's Build Back Better initiative, even the Chabahar port issue. I think that we need to be careful not to overstate just how far this is going to go. That said, to your point, this is very important from a U.S. perspective for several reasons. One is that I think it reflects a U.S. reset of its policy in the Middle East, which has been building for several years, moving away from a security-focused, militarized policy of the past where the U.S. was fighting wars in the Middle East and involved in counterterrorism activities. It's trying to move away from that and focus more on building partnerships with its close friends to pursue integration and trade. And, one reason for this is that the U.S. is not as reliant on energy supply as it had been in the Middle East in the past, and it's not fighting wars in the region for now. So it's trying to focus on building these broader types of longer-term commercial links with its allies and partners. I'd argue that the India factor is important here with the United States. It wants to work with India outside of the Indo-Pacific as the partnership expands and becomes stronger. And certainly the Abraham Accord issue is important here as well, as your last speaker noted. This is a big priority. One of the few foreign policy successes of the Trump administration that the Biden administration actually agrees with, the Abraham Accords. And indeed, I think from Washington, one of the hopes is that this corridor will build up more trade links, and through that more goodwill and trust that could eventually lead Israel to normalize relations with more of its Arab neighbors, especially Saudi Arabia. And this, of course, builds on the I2U2 project, which the U.S. is a big proponent of. Again, the idea is to build more trust and goodwill between Israel and its neighbors to try to create more formal relationships. And finally, I think that, yes, the China factor is critical here. I know that many participants in this corridor would not agree that this should be seen as a counter to China. But from a U.S. perspective, given the scope of U.S.-China competition, there is an idea here of presenting this corridor as an alternative to the investment model pursued by China's BRI. And we've already heard U.S. officials describe this as something that will be non-coercive, transparent, and that's a clear, an explicit contrast being drawn between this corridor and what the U.S. believes the Chinese investment model to be with BRI.